'Tis I, Dr. Dementia, and can we have a short video this week? Maybe, I don't know at this point. But, that's not even my main concern. My main concern is since the last video, my koala friend has been having some issues. I think trying to astral project into the koala has created some adverse side effects. This is why I don't use black magic on it. But I don't think there's going to be an issue. I think it's going to be temporary.
This is what you face. This is true power.
Hey, what's the worst that can happen anyway? You never know. Anyway, we now discuss Dominion's second expansion, known as Seaside, released in October of 2009, with an update pack that surprisingly came out last month, though I'm still waiting for my physical copy. It is available digitally. The theme of this set introduces a brand new type of card, a duration card. Duration cards coming in a nice orange color. And it usually not only affects the turn you play the card, but also the next turn after that. Now, that might not be the theme that all of these cards take, but that is going to be the majority of it. Now, we were given 8 duration cards to begin with, and while the update pack added some of those, we won't talk about the update pack until the next video. So why don't we just get right into the cards now and talk about each and every one of them.
Yes, I am.
So going right into it, we're going to talk about the first new attack card that is called Ambassador, costing 3 to purchase. Reveal a card from your hand, return up to 2 copies of it from your hand to the supply, then each other player gains a copy of it. Now consider this a pseudo-trasher. While it doesn't completely trash a card, it does send it back to the supply. The attack part is that every other player will get this. This is very useful in specific circumstances. First off, obviously, the curse engines that you have to deal with because they won't stop giving them to you. And it's usually the easiest way if you can get a couple of curses in your hand, get them out of there, and let your opponents have them just for being punk-ass little smartasses. I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, for 3 costs, pretty cheap. This is definitely an early game card, too, because you could set yourself up to get rid of an estate or 2, or even a copper or 2 to thin out your deck enough to really have your deck take off. And depending on how many people you're playing with, you could systematically turn this into a snowball effect that makes it so that they will have a very hard time ramping up their decks because of these circumstances. Funny little tidbit, with provinces, if you are playing with 2 people and you decide to take 2 provinces out of the supply after initially taking the last one out, you technically break the province rule of ending the game, so the game continues on because let's say you do get that last one, the pile is empty, you still have the rest of your turn to finish, you put 2 back, your opponent puts 1 back, the game is still on. Only really use this to end the game if you know you have enough victory points to benefit from. Early game card, mid game card too. Late game, at that point, you probably have yourself set up already, and I would only pick this up in the extreme circumstances where you need something to get rid of cards in your hand, like curses. If there's Chapel on the field, then I probably would take that over Ambassador. Still a useful card. I kind of like it. Next up, we have Bazaar. Bazaar is a little bit of a slight upgrade to a village. It costs 5 to purchase, plus 1 card, plus 2 actions, and plus 1 coin. Now, I say slight upgrade when you consider that village costs 3 to purchase for the plus 1 card, plus 2 actions. For plus 1 coin costing 5 to purchase, this is definitely not an early game card, and this is typically set for you to pick up in the mid game when you have an engine built up that you can take advantage of this. Especially when you consider Workshop or even Ironworks can pick this up unless Bridge was out there on the field to reduce its cost. But it does have its uses, and with plus 2 actions, it gives you a plus 1 in action advantage. So Smithy is a good combination if this is available to you. Being able to take advantage of some draw power or some extra actions, it's not a bad thing. That cost, though, is like its biggest downside. And again, you would want to take advantage when you have the ability to get it. I mean, even on a 5-2 split to start off with, it wouldn't be the first choice to pick up because it's not super powerful. I mean, at best, you could draw into a copper and gain plus 1, so you could get plus 2 in coin advantage. Maybe set yourself up for an early gold. What's to say? I mean, you could pull it off, but see what else is on the field. Otherwise, I'd say straight up mid-game for this card. If you can get a couple of them, great. You can build yourself up with plenty of action cards for your deck. Next up, we have the very first duration card of the set. It is Caravan. Caravan, costing 4 to purchase, an action duration card, plus 1 card, plus 1 action at the start of your next turn, plus 1 card. Now, this is a good card to pull into from a workshop or even Ironworks build. You know, it's not bad for 4. You net 0 on card and action advantage, but it's that second card you get on the next turn that definitely helps you out a lot better. Consider it playing Laboratory on your next turn by playing this card now. That's how it sets itself up. And it makes it so that you have a better chance of not filling your hand with more crap on the next turn. It makes your next turns a lot better. And I think that's where the theme of the duration cards come in. You set yourself up for a better turn coming up. I mean, you could still have a great turn now, but that being said, when you think about the overall positive effect of this, it's not super strong. It can be slow to start up with, but again, gaining the card rather than buying it is probably a lot better, because this has a usual lower priority when you consider you want better deck control. But if you have it, it's not a bad one to pick up early on. I definitely would not recommend this for a late game card. Early mid game, definitely early game. And again, if you find yourself with even Bazaar, Village, Smithy, Market, any of those cards, it's useful to fall back on. If I had to pick this between this or Great Halls, well, you know the option there. But there are some more useful cards. Again, the theme here with duration, look at your next turn. In the end, having 6 cards in your hand might not be a bad option. And with duration cards, you can throw in room. So you could do plus 2 cards, plus 2 action for your current turn, and then draw into 7 on your next turn, giving you a much better option. This one is a look at the supply piles. If you got Ironworks, if you got Workshop, great. Pull into them and grab a couple. Don't go overboard though. Next up is another new attack card, Cutpurse. Cutpurse costing 4 to purchase, plus 2 coin, and the attack each other player discards a copper or reveals a hand with no copper. Now that parentheses I'll talk about in a moment, but like Coppersmith, this is a very early game card because your opponent is basically building up their deck and they're starting off with 7. You can make this work in either a 3-4 entry split or even a 5-2 entry split. Pull this out, potentially giving you an extra terminal silver from the Cutpurse to be able to afford some more pricier cards costing 5 or more, or even a gold. It will make your opponent have a very rough start, and if you can get this a couple of times to go off, then fantastic. Your opponent's probably going to have a hard time building up their deck, and you're going to get an early game advantage here. Early game, that's his main thing. Late game, you're probably only going to get that parentheses effect. I mean, yes, you could see what your opponent has, and if you had a reaction card, you would at least be ready for it, but it kind of tells you what's in their hand right now, so you know what to expect, and you can plan ahead for your next turn. But that's really about it. It's early game, it's quick, and I mean, you could work well with this, but mid game, you're not relying on this, and definitely not late game. Get it if you get it at the beginning. If there are better cards on the field, get those first, and limit yourself on this one. The smaller your deck, the better it is for you to take advantage of it, and the quicker you can make your opponent have a harder time setting themselves up for future turns. Next, we have a very interesting action card, Embargo. Embargo costs 2 to purchase, it gives you plus 2 coin, and then you trash this to add an Embargo token to a supply pile. For the rest of the game, when a player buys a card from that pile, they gain a curse. Now, first off, I do want to mention, Seaside did come with Embargo tokens that you can use, and you just basically put the token on the supply pile. That's how those tokens work. This is a very interesting card because it requires a little bit of calculation and predicting. If you know what your opponent is going to go for in terms of a strategy and you're not going to follow it, Embargo is a good choice to force them to consider, Do they really want to continue that strategy, or do they want to take a curse every time that happens? Now remember, there's 10 curses per game, so it's dependent on if they think they can afford it. It will thick out their deck a little bit, but if they're going to be cards to get rid of the curses, then they're probably going to be great. I will say Throne Room, this card, you only get the trash effect once, but you do get +4 coin instead of +2. Just keeping that in mind in here. Basically, watch what your opponent's trying to do. If you can understand, based on the supply piles, what's on the field, and you know that you can anticipate a lot of this, then yeah, Embargo's a good target to get. Because of its cost, it's an early game card. However, I will say, you won't. There's better options. There are stronger options, and you could technically Ironworks a card, and you can offset that parentheses expect. They will gain it, but since they didn't buy it, they don't get the curse. So there are a lot of workarounds for it. The main use is when you're ahead on specific cards that are available to you. You get the important cards first before your opponent does, and then embargo it. Then you force your opponent to decide if it's worth it or not. And that's about it. It's interesting, and it's one of the few and unique cards that has something like this. Is it great? I mean, yeah, you could pay 2 for +2 coin compared to just getting a silver. The problem is, it is absolutely a terminal silver, and you will only get its effect once. That trashing means you've just thinned out your deck of a potential silver. I would not recommend taking advantage of this multiple times. I would say maybe once or twice at best. And again, if there are cards that you know you're going to get that are a lot better than this, go for those instead. Just be wary, because your opponent's going to pick up an embargo. Definitely an early game card. I wouldn't even consider mid game unless they were still picking up cards on the supply pile. And it's definitely not a late game card. We definitely have some unique cards for this expansion, and this next one is no different. Explorer. Costing 5 to purchase. You may reveal a province from your hand. If you do, gain a gold to your hand. If you don't, gain a silver to your hand. Now, immediately, mid to late game on this card, this is not your fist pickup. No, because first off, and I cannot stress this enough, Courtier is a much better option to pick up at 5 than Explorer would be. There is very rare circumstances where you need to have a province in your hand, especially with these early expansions. Later on, it matters a lot, and we will get to that particular card when we get to it. But I would not spend 5 in the beginning of the game to gain a silver because I don't have any provinces. And if you already have a province, you already have a way of generating golds fast enough. So, the only rare circumstance is if you need treasure gaining like up the wazoo. If the cards that are available on the supply pile are not helping you get treasures quick enough, Explorer is going to be the option there that's going to work out for you. I can't really think of really other good options besides that. I mean, it could provide fodder. I mean, you could upgrade or even replace the treasures you kept getting for better cards that way rather than pay for them. But if you've got Explorer on the field, you probably have a lot more better options. Again, because of the fact that you need to reveal a province to gain the gold, this is definitely a mid-game card. This is definitely not an early game card unless for whatever reason you want to gain silvers this way and you want to just build a silver deck. But I can't see myself enjoying this card that much. Next on the list is another duration card, and perhaps one of my favorites that I've loved playing multiple times. Fishing Village. Fishing Village costing 3 to purchase, plus 2 cards, plus 1 coin. At the start of your next turn, plus 1 action and plus 1 coin. This sets yourself up pretty well for your current turn and your next turn. Now, additional actions is nothing to scoff at, especially when you get 2 more for your current turn, and then you start off with 2 on your next turn. You're basically synergizing with any of your draw cards. You know, definitely your villages, definitely, you know, markets, and even Smithy as well. Surprisingly enough, there are some cards down the line we'll go into that actually work very, very well with this card. This is to prevent you from being able to have dud hands coming up. And really, it gives you... I would still choose this over a silver just because of the ability to play more out of your hand to potentially add up to more than just the silver in terms of treasure. And if you think about it, you gain a silver technically from the Fishing Village, split in half from 1 coin this turn, 1 coin next turn. The plus actions is its main benefit, but that's also part of its main downside. There's no draw support for this card itself. You need to combo this off of anything else, but that's nothing to scoff at. You could play a variety of draw cards, library, smithy, like I said. Cards that distinctly just you play in to specifically draw, which makes this a good throne room target as well, just because of the fact that it turns it into plus 4 actions, plus 2 coin, and then your next turn plus 2 actions, plus 2 coin. If you set your deck set up for upcoming action cards that you know you can take advantage of all at once, this is a very good synergizer. And for 3, I could say you could get this early game, mid game. Late game's a good choice too, but if you're starting to pick it up late game, you probably are not going to draw into it quick enough. This is definitely an early game card, and again, if it's on the field, I'm choosing this over silver. So, you know, this is something you definitely want to take advantage of, especially if the cards on the supply piles don't give you actions at all. Now, the next attack card is funny in a specific way, and I'll explain why. Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship costs 5 to purchase, plus 2 cards. Each of the player with 4 or more cards in hand puts cards from their hand onto the deck until they have 3 cards in hand. Now, this is a very, very good attack card for basically downsizing your opponent's hands every turn. I'd say this is much better than Militia because it's not a discard. They're not getting rid of the trash. Sometimes they have to put the trash back, setting themselves up for such a for an even worser hand. It can get nasty. I mean, this is first off, you get plus 2 cards, so you know having extra actions is always a good thing to draw into this. That's nothing to scoff at. And for 5 costs, you should have something. You should have at least plus 2 cards. This attack though is disgusting, and the history on this is that this was considered one of the most hated attack cards when a poll was done by Donald X Vaccarino on Reddit. Expert players might understand how to counteract this card, and I'll explain this in a second, but if you're still new to the game and you're coming up to this card and you're still trying to figure out what works into this, you probably are not going to be thrilled with dealing with it. I would say it could be borderline overpowered if you were playing it the smart way. But to counteract this card, there's a couple of different ways you could do this. First off, obviously, we're going to talk about a duration card coming up very soon in this set that can offset this. But obviously, Moat, you could reveal that and boom, you don't have to worry about that. You could also plan ahead with Diplomat's reaction effect. This is one of the few times that's actually beneficial for that, so definitely a good use there. Now, because of the fact your opponent is putting them back onto the deck, this actually sets themselves up for Wishing Well if that was available to them, because then they know exactly what to do. Those are a couple of good options there. It is a 5-cost card, and honestly, late early game into mid game. And like I said, this is a card that people hate because of how good it is. And this would make you a dick with this card more than Thief or Bandit, honestly. You don't need many cards because of the +2 draw. And like I said, if there are cards where they're able to negate it, you're basically left with that +2 draw, and that's about it. You don't need many copies of this card. So this is also dependent on what's available into the supply pile, and it's not. I wouldn't pick it up as your first card in a 5-2 split. Just saying right there. Next up, we have another new and very interesting duration card, and that's Haven. Haven costing 2 to purchase, +1 card, +1 action. Set aside a card from your hand, face down under this. At the start of your next turn, put it to your hand. Now, its main use, basically, it's got 2 main use cases. The first one is if you have extra treasure you know you're not going to need for this turn, because you only have 1 buy and you can easily afford a province, put the extra treasure under Haven to set yourself up for another potential province in your next turn. This also gives you the ability to set up better combos to start off with for your next turn as well. So putting an action card that would be a waste to use now for your upcoming turn is also a good benefit. Both of these combine draw use upon its main case, and that is if you are basically drawing into your deck every single turn. This gives you the ability to start off very strong hands and just go to town with it. And for a 2-cost card, this is quite cheap, where you go net 0 in both card and actions. So I definitely don't see a reason why you should not pick this up. And, you know, it's basically just a nice card to just take advantage of it. Early game, yes. Mid game, yes. The late game, obviously, if you can't draw into the card, it's not useful. So for late game, you need to have a very small deck size for Haven to have some potential use there. But overall, for all around, very good card. Next up, we have a brand new dual action victory card, Island. Island costs 4 to purchase. It gives you 2 victory points. You put this and a card from your hand onto your Island mat. Now, to go into a little bit more context here, the Island mat is cards that are set aside that are not currently in your deck, but still matter in terms of them being counted toward your total deck at the end of the game. This is usually good to just pull out any unnecessary victory cards without, like, trashing them. And it does give you a little bit of victory points. At 4 costs, though, you're definitely not... You shouldn't be upgrading into Island unless Mills is not available, because they are the same cost after all, just keeping that in mind. It is a one-shot effect, so obviously for you to benefit from Island, you would need to just pick up an Island again and again in order to be able to do this. However, in circumstances where Throne Rooming Embargo's effect only happens once, Throne Rooming Island is a good choice, because then you get to put 2 cards onto the Island mat at the same time, because you aren't trashing this, you're setting it aside. So that actually matters in terms of the rules. It's still part of the game, it's not been trashed, you can still really work well with this. Again, this is a card, if you really want to thin out your deck with any weak cards, definitely your estates, definitely your coppers, and if for whatever reason you do not have a way to get rid of any curses, this is your next best thing. And again, you could replace into this from estates. You could upgrade this from Great Halls. Again, if you have this or Mills, why? But you know, if you're playing with them, doesn't matter. Enjoy it. I really need to stress this. I'm not trying to rip on Great Halls that much. It's still it's still a card, and if you have it, play it. Let it randomize. It's not a big deal. My point being here is, though, early game, mid game, only late game if you really are dealing with curses too much. But this is basically a decent, not a great one, but a decent deck thinner. And of course, obviously, it gives you some victory points. So One more thing though, it is a victory card, so it is based on the number of players. 8 for 2 players, 12 for 3 or more. So if everybody else is starting to pick up islands, your strategy can go down to the drain very quickly. Keep that in mind. Now we have another duration card and another one of my all-time favorites for the game in general, Lighthouse. Lighthouse costs 2 to purchase. It is +1 action, +1 coin. At the start of your next turn, +1 coin. Until then, when another player plays an attack card, it doesn't affect you. This is the first duration card that guarantees attack immunity. And it is just a very, very strong card. Because, first off, while it gives you attack immunity, you can still play reactions as a result of it. So keep that in mind. You're still able to play any reaction card from your hand if it benefits you. So Diplomat, definitely a good choice to fall off of with Lighthouse still in effect. You're also getting a total of +2 coin from this, which is, you know, almost as good as getting a silver. And honestly, I would recommend this over the silver, more so than even Fishing Village right there. Again, like Fishing Village, its downside is that you don't draw into anything else. You get +1 action just for this turn, not for your next one, but you also get +1 coin for this turn and your next turn. So it's definitely just giving you some extra coin and just overall attack immunity. Now, you could play this and then draw into Haven to set yourself up for a much better turn. I mean, duration cards are going to synergize with each other. Not a bad thing there. And, you know, even Laboratory is a good price for this on a 5-2 split. You could get this for your 2, Laboratory with 5, and you're great. If your deck is thin enough, having 2 or 3 lighthouses in your deck means that you will not be affected by any attack cards. Though, there are very rare circumstances to be affected by those attack cards, so you want to be careful of if you want that to happen when you use this, because you have that immunity no matter what, which you can't elect to have the immunity, I should say. So you have that no matter what. But in general, this is a fantastic card. Early, mid, late game, all around, just delicious. Next up, we have Lookout. Lookout costs 3 to purchase, gives you +1 action. Then you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and in this specific order, you trash one of them, you discard one of them, then you put the other one back on top of your deck. This is a good card for basically milling out crap cards and setting yourself up for future turns. This is sifting, essentially. And early on, this gets rid of your junk. This is also good for getting rid of a bunch of curses. More specific circumstances are like that. As you get into the late game, even the mid game to late game, you want to be extremely careful about what you have in your hand and what's coming on your deck, because you need to make sure that you don't trash the wrong card, you don't discard the wrong card, you don't put the curse back on top of your deck. So you don't want to have a situation where you could potentially draw into 3 golds, and I've seen it happen. You have to trash one of them, you have to discard one of them, and then the other one stays put, which means you just lost 6 coin for your next turn. This is a deck where if your opponent is trying to overwhelm you with crap, replacing cards, yes, Saboteur, I'm going to say that right now, this is a good counteract to Saboteur. This is just all around a very, very useful setup. Limit yourself. That's all I'm going to say. Next up, we have another duration card, Merchant Ship. Costing 5 to purchase. Now and at the start of your next turn, +2 coin. Now, this is not the best for a duration card, but of course, for some good positive ones we've had, we're going to have a couple of bad ones to go off with. And it has some serious cost issues. And it's not really great for, treasure generation here. First off, 5 for +2 on your first turn, +2 on your second turn. No other benefit besides that. No extra actions. No no card draw. There's really very limited circumstances where this is useful in. You could draw into it, have one final action, and could play it. That's great. That's probably your best circumstance. There is another duration card we'll talk about shortly. Also works great with this one. Money strategies. That's basically about it. If you will limit it in terms of money generation for your supply piles, this is a good pickup. But be wary, you need to have just extra actions. Unfortunately, when this card was originally created, it should have had a plus buy. And I believe Koala.Exe Arena was trying to experiment with that, but it never actually happened. But surprisingly enough, I'll tell you right now, this was not one of the cards removed in version 2.0. So, there's still some use for it. Definitely mid to late game. Definitely not an early game card. Honestly, the very rare circumstance on a 5-2 split, yes, but if there were better cards out there, no. Well, okay, yeah, maybe early coin generation, but that's about it. Next, we have another type of village that's actually a little bit more unique than the ones I've already talked about, Native Village. Native Village costs 2 to purchase, plus 2 actions. You then choose one. Put the top card of your deck face down on your Native Village mat, where you may look at those cards at any time, or put all the cards from your mat into your hand. Now, this is a little bit better than Island, per se, because of the fact that not only can you look at these cards at any time, but with the help of Native Village, you can decide when to bring all those cards back into your hand. Rather than Island, which just takes them out of the game for you without having to trash. Now, this is potentially useful in the main circumstance where you're going to have a quote-unquote huge hand for a very large set of actions. So, if you have a Native Village good to go, you can bring everything that you stored away, bring it all out at once, and boom. You have some fun with it. It's similar to Exile. So yeah, it is similar to Island, so you do get to thin your deck out, but unlike Island, you don't want to thin out crap cards for this. This is not what this card is used for. It is for much better action cards or even large amount of treasure to just take advantage of all at once. And again, another duration card, we'll talk about it, that works pretty well with this. And the thing was, you had to be able to know what was on this card, what was on the mat. And surprisingly, the original version of this card did not have that effect. When it was play tested, it made this card extremely worse. The fact that you can now look at these cards is basically an errata to it. So it is definitely a much better card. This is not an early game card, though. I'd say mid to late game. Mid to late game only because if you know you're going to run into a bad hand, you can put this aside to get it ready for a much better hand. But for this to really work, you need a couple of copies of Native Village just to be able to pull it off. Next up, we have Navigator. Navigator costs them 4 to purchase, plus 2 coin. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Either discard them all or put them back in any order. Now, this is a lot of scrying power. I will say that right now. Being able to look at the top 5 is very good to set yourself up for your next turn. However, having the choice of either putting them all back the way they are in any order or discarding all of them is not the best in deck control. You don't want to just discard all 5 cards unless they're all crap. That's the only time that's going to really work well. And I'm going to be honest, plus 2 coin for a cost of 4 to do that? You're only doing this if you're basically getting flooded with crappier cards. If basically Masquerade's been in effect, witches are bringing out curses, you're basically shat out of luck. You have to decide for yourself at that point. If you got decent cards in there and a couple of crap ones, you have to figure out if it's worth it for your next turn. You could draw into something better, sure. You could also draw into something worse. And this could trigger some bad shuffling too, because when you shuffle your deck, that's it. This is a mid to late game card. It's definitely not an early game card. And Navigator I would only choose if there were other action cards that were not as powerful as Navigator. If Navigator was the most powerful card, get it. But at that point, you're playing with a lot of crappier cards, and there might even be something that's a little bit better. Hold off on adding too many to your deck. Next up, we have a duration card that actually gives you an extra turn. It's called Outpost. Outpost costs 5 to purchase. If this is the first time you played an Outpost this turn, and the previous turn wasn't yours, then take an extra turn after this one, and you only draw 3 cards from your next hand. Now, I just want to clarify this a little bit more in detail. First off, obviously it tells you as long as you didn't have another turn when you played this card, that you can take advantage of it. Also, it specifies you can only take advantage of using Outpost once per turn. That's it. This is otherwise a very good synergizer for other duration cards that you can play that can benefit from. And honestly, this is good for merchant. This is actually a good step to merchant ship. You could play merchant ship and Outpost if you had the actions, and you'd be good to go for your next turn. This is also very powerful if your deck is based around action cards that allow you to draw into stuff. Thereby, you could get away from having more than 3 cards in your hand. You could set yourself up for being able to purchase more stuff if you have a fantastic hand to draw into. So you need to somehow know what's coming up in order to take advantage of it. That's it all around. Good when you have a thin deck and just a good engine based off of some deck control and a lot of draw power. One thing I will mention, just for rule clarity, Outpost actually gets discarded at the cleanup phase. All the duration cards stay out usually for the next turn. Outpost is one of those rare exceptions. Mid to late game, at that point, once you know what you have what your engine is, and you can get it relatively quickly, this is much more powerful if you can get it on every other turn, just so that you basically will start chipping away at some of those victory cards. Next up, we have Pearl Diver. Pearl Diver costs 2 to purchase, +1 card, +1 action. Look at the bottom card of your deck, you may put it on top. Now, there are very rare circumstances where a bottom deck scry is generally going to be super useful. And at that point, that's where its potential ends. There's not many circumstances where you could really take advantage of a card like this. I mean, Outpost, yes. You could have at least knowing 1 card that's coming up in your hand. But at that point, you're probably going to have a better time with Navigator and setting your hand up a lot better than that. But it is a cheap card, and in a 5-2 split, it's good to start off with, because then you could get ready for potentially having another copper where you wouldn't want to have an estate. But that's about it. Again, it's not a super powerful card. It's low in cost, but at that point, if there's better cards on the field, you're probably going to get those instead. But if I had to choose, early game card, maybe mid game card, definitely not a late game card. Next up, we have a very interesting attack card, Pirate Ship. Costing 4 to purchase, you get to choose one. +1 coin per coin token on your Pirate Ship mat, or each of the player reveals the top 2 cards of their deck, trashes one of those treasures that you choose, and discards the rest. And then if anyone trashes a treasure, you add a coin token to your Pirate Ship map. Now, this is a very interesting attack card, but let's talk about the cons first before I talk about the positives of this. The con, obviously, is the fact that you are essentially milling out your opponent's deck. They could have crap in there that is not a treasure, and you get absolutely no benefit from it if you choose to attack. Now, obviously, at the very beginning, you choose to attack this, and there are some situations where your opponent would want to get rid of those coppers quickly, especially if they're generating silvers. Now, if you kept playing this over and over again, sure, but there's no extra actions for this. The unwanted coppers is pretty much its biggest negative. Now, I will say, if for whatever reason you were able to get this off the board and just constantly get an attack for treasures, you could rack up those coin tokens pretty quickly to give you a very huge advantage for purchasing power. But also, there's no extra buys. So, you have to have a card on the supply pile and in your hand that gives you another buy to really benefit from this. I will say Throne Rooming that effect is pretty useful for late game, but when you look at the attack, it's a weak card. It was more beneficial to your opponent, and being able to gain coin tokens, it happened too slowly. and you weren't able to get enough strength enough of the times, and your opponent could pick up a pirate ship too and do the same thing for that. They're not the best. Also, you could also discard curses, which means you just helped your opponent out and you got absolutely nothing for it. While it looks like it's a fun card on the surface, there's a lot of issues with it, and potentially could not be the best attack card you want to use. If you did want to get it though on a 3-4 split, pick it up early to just start getting to work on those coppers. Even if they were to replace them, you could take advantage of having the extra coin per turn once you say have maybe 3 or 4 coin tokens available to you, but nothing earlier than that. And look at that, when I was saying we needed some more buy power, Salvager. Salvager costing 4 to purchase, plus 1 buy, trash a card from your hand, plus 1 coin per 1 coin it costs. Now, this is actually a very useful trasher, and surprisingly when I say this, it is an early game card and a late game card, but I'd say not a mid game card, and I'll explain why. First off, for the early game, your target for this is estates, no matter what, because automatically that gives you +2 for that turn. And if you had 1 estate and the rest were coppers, there's your first gold right off the bat. Of course, you're very limited on estates, so once you reach a certain point, you're going to need a better target for that one. Now, some action cards are useful. If you realize there are action cards that you are never going to be able to take advantage of once you started a combo that you can't finish, then yeah, this is another good example. Now, for the late game part, you could basically trash golds to have a much better effect for this to get to your provinces quickly. And, better yet, if you have more victory points than your opponent, trashing a province to buy in another province still gives you net 0 in victory points, but it also prevents 1 extra province that could go for your opponent. You're basically taking any expensive cards that you know you do not need and just throwing them away for a lot better options, thinning out your deck at the same time and giving you a much better advantage late game. Now, while this is a trasher, you could target coppers and curses, but keep in mind, you are going to get nothing out of that. They cost 0. Something like Steward or Chapel is a better option for those. You want to start off with estates specifically for Salvager, but having a +1 buy gives you a little bit of extra advantage. And if you do set for province, then you probably have more than enough gold to purchase 2 provinces that turn. You're gaining a benefit out of that. Like I said, early game card or late game card. Hold off on the mid for now. And next up, we have another attack card and curse generator, Sea Hag. Costing 4 to purchase. Each of the player discards the top card of the deck, then gains a curse onto their deck. So essentially, the curse will replace the top card that was just discarded. And even when there are no curses, players will still discard the top card of their deck when it's played. It basically just was, it junked up your opponent's deck by adding more curses. Now, that can be good, but when we talk about Saboteur, that's as beneficial as it gets, and even that's minuscule. Like Saboteur, you gain no direct benefit whatsoever at all. And it takes up space, which is only designed to add more curses to your opponent. Now, if this card was played late in the game, when you had a very late game advantage, then yeah, Sea Hag would be fantastic for use. And it's usually when you're ahead of your opponent that this is the best card to take advantage of. But if they're relying heavily on cards to trash, if there is Lookout, if there is Chapels, Salvage, any of those, they could just get rid of the curse without any issue and just reset everything. And they'd go through the 10 curses like very quickly. Its downside, honestly, is the fact that you gain no benefit. If you were to play this card, mid to late game. Early game, especially if there are cards to trash curses, I would not see much use for it at that point. And for our next card, we have a very interesting luck-based one in the form of Smugglers, costing 3 to purchase. Gain a copy of the card costing up to 6, and then the player to your right gained on their last turn. Now, a couple of key things to note before I talk about synergies. First off, the card has to cost 6 or less when you play it, not when the player gained the card that you're targeting. This also looks at the most recent turn they made, so if they played Outpost, then it's when they had the 3-card hand for that turn. Now, the card also doesn't have to be bought. It could be gained from something like Ironworks or even Workshop, but that also counts as a target for Smugglers. And if they gain multiple cards, you can choose between them. Also, lastly, they have to be in the supply pile. Now, couple of cards that work very well for this. Lurkers, if they've been trashing cards, you can target the card that they gain back from the trash pile, which is a very good option to work with here. When it comes to the cost effect, Bridge, cost reduction works for this perfectly. They could gain a province, and if you were able to reduce the cost of province to 6, then you could use Smugglers to pick that up. And Throne Rooming Bridge, not a bad option. A more specific, circumstance of that. Other than that, you are looking at basically just seeing what your opponent gets. You don't need many copies of this card, because if you could afford to get some of those cards yourselves, and you pick up Smugglers, you're probably just wasting an extra turn. But if you notice potential combos that you can pull off on this, that works well. And you have to just make sure that the cards are in the supply pile. There's specific synergies, and it's more on the luck of the draw. This is also useful for cards that have restrictions to purchasing them, but not gaining them. So if you can work around the purchase restriction to pick it up, another good option. This could be an early game card, because at that point you're basically purchasing anything costing up to 6. Mid game as well, and depending on synergies, you could potentially work this into a late game, not as much though. Again, this is basically based on what's on the pile and what your opponent decides to do. So unless you're a mind reader, you're basically relying on luck. Now next we have a duration card that I have been hinting at with a couple of the other cards we've talked about in this set so far, and that is Tactician, costing 5 to purchase. If you have at least 1 card in your hand, you discard your hand, and at the start of your next turn, plus 5 cards, plus 1 action, and plus 1 buy. Tactician is essentially a card that combines 2 turns into 1. You get basically double of everything except for coin. But, you basically create a mega turn. And this is where cards such as Lighthouse and even Fishing Village come into play quite well to build up those actions and that extra currency. Merchant Village, another good one. All the duration cards work beautifully with Tactician. Now, the big thing to note here is you have to sacrifice your first turn to play this in order to get a much better mega turn next up. And that's where the downside of it comes into play, because you basically will have to either give up good cards in your hand to play Tactician, or you have a crap hand altogether and then play Tactician. Either way, you lose out on potential buy phase of something. Now, this can be offsetted a couple of different ways. First off, this is where merchantship is useful. This is basically where any card, Cutpurse, Explorer, Market, anything that generates currency, even Courtier, generating currency. At the very least, if you have cards to generate currency and you have enough actions to play those cards, play those first before you play Tactician, because then at that point you immediately go into your buy phase and you're not entirely screwed, because then you at least have generated some coin to buy something. And then with all the duration cards you played, you get ready for an amazing turn. This is potentially a mid to late game card. Throne Room, I will say right now, synergizes technically, but you cannot get its effect twice just by playing Throne Room itself. There is a way around that, but that is down the line in a future expansion. I won't get into that now. I will mention this, however, as an official ruling. when you play this card, if you don't have any other cards in your hand, Tactician will do nothing else. You have to have one extra card besides Tactician in order to use this effect. Otherwise, Tactician will get cleaned up with the rest of your hand at the end of the turn. You do not get its effect. Again, though, overall, a lovely card to try, and I have a lot of fun with it. Next up, we have another action card that technically synergizes with itself in a unique way. Treasure Map, costing 4 to purchase. You trash this and another treasure map from your hand. If you trash 2 of them, you gain 4 golds on top of your deck. Now, I say this is synergizes with itself because you need at least 2 copies for this to work. If you only played 1, you just trash the 1 copy, nothing happens. There is not many circumstances where you could really take advantage of Treasure Map unless you are constantly drawing into your deck every single time. Otherwise, you need this in the early game because you have a better chance of pulling 2 treasure maps at once in the early game. If you also scryed enough to be able to get the 2 treasure maps on top of your deck, that's also a good option too. But the offset of gaining 4 golds means your next turn is you have at least 12 gold. 12 coin, I'm sorry. And you're basically just buying something. You're probably just buying a province at that point. And honestly, that's it. If you had an action card, sure. If it gave you an extra buy, that's probably where that's going to offset from. Salvager with the effect of treasure map proccing is probably one of the best options because then you can sack one of those golds to actually maximize getting 2 provinces that turn. Or even better, you could essentially replace them into provinces. And that will give you some extra victory point coverage. Again, this is an early game card. The only way I can recommend this being mid to late is if you are able to easily get these 2 cards at the same time in the same hand. With a smaller deck size, it's a lot easier. Otherwise, it has to be in a build where you're constantly drawing into your deck. Next up, coming down to the wire, we have Treasury. Treasury costing 5 to purchase, plus 1 card, plus 1 action, plus 1 coin. At the end of your buy phase this turn, if you didn't gain a victory card in your buy phase, you may put this onto your deck. Now, specifically has to be during your buy phase. You can gain victory cards outside of your buy phase, and you can still use Treasury's effect. Now, while gaining plus 1 coin, plus 1 card, plus 1 action is great, it's minimal draw power for 1 extra coin. I could see this in potentially other cards. Now, this could still be useful in a situation where there's not much draw power or not much currency power available in the supply piles, and I would still take advantage of this. If you're in a situation where you want to get multiple actions and multiple coin, and golds and silvers, that sort of thing, Treasury is good to continuously draw off of. But I wouldn't overflow your deck with this too much because, first off, if you've gotten all of the Treasury cards you can all at once, then you're going to draw into those before you draw into anything else. And then once you buy a victory card, then they're all going to get trashed, discarded, which means you lose out on using all of those treasuries until your deck is reshuffled, or you can get one from the discard pile back into your deck. And I wouldn't overload your deck with those. It's a good effect, yes, but first off, it's cost 5, so you need to spend a good chunk of change for each treasury. 2 to 3 at most is a good way to comfortably take advantage of this. Again, basically going through your entire deck is good for this. Tactician is a good follow-up with this card, though, because of the fact that it does generate the currency. And since you are basically ending your turn and you did not gain anything, the treasuries can go on your deck with Tactician's effect. You could have a very good hand to set up with. And it does give you the extra buy, so a lot of extra currency would not go to waste there. If you get a 5-2 split, you could potentially start off with 1 copy of the card. This is more of a mid-game than it is early game, and you don't want to overload yourself unless you're going to specifically restrict yourself to purchasing action cards, because once you buy a victory card, they all go to the discard pile, so be careful how you play it. Second to last card on the list, we have Warehouse. Costing 3 to purchase, plus 3 cards, plus 1 action. Discard 3 cards, simple as that. This card offers deck control in 2 forms. Sifting through your deck and thinning out your deck. So, this is basically designed to thin your deck out of the junk, the estates, curses, coppers, and getting those better action cards out quicker, getting your more expensive treasures. This is a card which has reliability upon other cards that draw into it and give you some benefits from without a disgusting negative repercussion, hence why it only costs 3 to purchase. By playing this technically, and plus 3 cards to discard 3 cards, you go -1 in card advantage because you have to play the card in order to do this. So eventually you will reach a point that if you have multiple warehouses, you have to be careful when you play it because your hand size might be so small that playing another one is not going to be worth it. You want to kind of play this card at the beginning of your turns more than at the end of your turns, when you want much better action cards available to you without such a bad downside to it, in order for you to really maximize your output. And once you have a good setup, then you're good to go. If you're able to draw into your deck very quickly, you don't need many copies of Warehouse. And honestly, you should not have multiple copies of Warehouse. You, at most, probably 2. And not even a early game card. I'd say mid to late game when you have your engine good to go, because this just draws into your engine faster. Again, with the way Warehouse works, play it first, don't play it at the end. Because your benefit at the beginning of the turn is going to look a lot better than at the end when your hand size doesn't mean jack shit. And lastly, the final card of the set and the final duration card, Wharf. Wharf costs 5 to purchase. Now and at the start of your next turn, plus 2 cards and plus 1 buy. This is one of the strongest draw cards for the game. It is a very powerful duration draw card, and you basically start your hand size with 7 for your next turn, rather than 5 with 2 buys for it. This is a fantastic card to basically start your turn with, and this can also be one of the best cards to have in a turn when you still have plenty of actions to work with, because that's the only downside. You want to have plenty of actions to go with this card. So markets, villages, laboratories, secret passage, you basically want to stack them up with this card. Treasuries work great with this. And this is how you want to start off using Warehouse. There's no better way to get some draw power and some extra buy power than this card. This is probably one of the best, and because of that reason, you definitely want to be, this has to be one of your earliest targets. If you have a 5-2 split at your start, you pick this up first. It is that great, because it gives your deck some outstanding early purchasing power and some cycling synergizing. That extra buy will come to use as well. Like I said, the only major downside is you basically should have some extra actions before you play this. And this stacks well with Tactician, that if you can play the Wharf, get a couple of cards that generate currency, then play Tactician, your next turn, you will have 12 cards in your hand and 3 buys. You're basically good for that turn, and you will basically make up for both of those turns combined with some outstanding work. While its cost is expensive, get this as early as possible. You want to be ready to use this. So early game, mid game, if your deck is small enough, late game. Definitely worth it. And with that, that's the end of Seaside version 1.0. The next video we'll do, we'll talk about Seaside version 2.0 with the update pack. Cards were removed, new cards that were added, that sort of thing. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. When this video goes up, I will be taking a week off with the missus to enjoy the sights in Dublin, Ireland. I will be back on August 5th, but I will be leaving on July 30th, so I will not be doing any streaming for the next couple of weeks because of that fact. However, I will have a video good to go while I'm gone. That will be the Seaside version 2.0, and I might also have another small video on the start of the promo cards, which I've yet to talk about as well. And with that, thank you very much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Go check out Twitch. Go check out Twitter. All that jazz. Please help me. More subscribers means that this koala will not be the death of me or will not try to possess me in my nightmares. I'll see you guys next time. Adios!
The forces of the universe bend to me.